Thank you all for being here. Thank you for experiencing this jury trial. There's nothing quite like it, and I'm glad that you guys were along for the ride here. So, way back when we did voir dire, I know it was a couple of weeks ago, but one thing I really talked about, and what I talked about too during our opening statement, is just all I'm going to ask at the end of this thing is for you folks to look at the facts and follow the law exactly the way that Judge Kuhn described it. So what that law is boiled down to are these jury instructions. The people have presented basically one of the instructions up there, but I would ask you folks when you go back into your jury deliberations specifically to look at jury instruction 15.3 and 15.4. 15.3 is the specific elements of operating while intoxicated. Now why I say to look at that and why that's important is because at the bottom of the second paragraph of it, it gives us our definition of what under the influence of alcohol means. And I've highlighted it here, it's right there at the bottom, and basically it says this, I'm going to read verbatim. The test is whether, because of drinking alcohol, the defendant's mental or physical condition was significantly affected and the defendant was no longer able to operate a vehicle in a normal manner. Now that's a very, very, very specific definition. That's what you folks are here to decide. Whether due to his consumption of alcohol, was he able to operate a vehicle in a normal manner? Was he significantly affected by that alcohol? I put forward that he wasn't. Now, although the prosecutor didn't really bring it up, they're also have put in here this operating while visibly impaired as a possible verdict. And I would ask that you folks not do that either. And I'm going to read you that. That's 15.4. I'm going to read you the instruction for that, the test. Due to the drinking of alcohol, the defendant drove with less ability than would an ordinary careful driver. The defendant's driving ability must have been lessened to the point that it would have been noticed by another person. Okay? So those are basically the two tests that you folks have to sort of look at here as you sift this out. Why I talked about driving and why I brought that up in the opening statement and why that's the most important part of our case is because when you look at those two definitions, it's all about the driving. Now, let's look at my client's driving in this case. Now, we know he drove perfectly fine from his house to Cowboy Joe's, I think that's the name of it, and he and his girlfriend go there to Cowboy Joe's, the band doesn't show up, and then they leave. So we have this issue of the driving from the bar to right here on M59. So, okay, let's see how he drove. There was no evidence that anybody called 911 to report some sort of, motorcyclist swerving all across the road. There was no evidence presented that my client was behaving erratically. His girlfriend, who they're not even dating anymore, she got up here and said he was driving perfectly fine. No wheelies, no speeding, no nothing. He was just driving normally. So when you look at those definitions, even if he had consumed alcohol, he was driving just fine. Based on that alone, you should find him not guilty. Now, in addition to that, what we have presented, and this is what happens in these drunk driving cases, is we have these issues about sobriety tests. Okay? Now, my client first did not cause that incident, and it's not an accident, it's an incident because his girlfriend fell off that bike. Now, if she was really holding on tight, he would have fallen off that bike. He didn't. As soon as she falls off, he turns around, he gets back there, he calls 911, and then they get there. All right? Now, we had some testimony from Ms. Scholes, and I know that she was affected by this. We saw her up here. She was very emotional, and rightfully so. I mean, you don't see something like that every day, and that will have a tremendous effect on you. But if you've ever been in an accident, or if you've ever been through anything like that, memory is not like playing Monday morning quarterback. It's very difficult to remember what happened. I mean, you think about a very chaotic incident that happens out of nowhere that you weren't expecting. Memory is different, and with her memory was different. I'm not saying that she wasn't being honest, because I know she was trying to be honest. She was. But she was reliving what she remembered. And what she remembered wasn't necessarily exactly what happened. I mean, just look at how she describes first seeing the motorcycles. She describes motorcycles in the plural, that there's 3 to 4 different motorcycles altogether. We know not just through what we heard on from what my client said to the officers, but through his girlfriend at the time, that they just went there to this country bar together. There wasn't anybody else. So when Ms. Scholes says, I saw other motorcyclists there, that's probably not the case. And there's been no evidence presented to the contrary of that. Now, We all know about the Myers right there. We've all probably been there a million times. She pulls onto Pontiac Lake Road and then takes a right onto 59, right where the Harley-Davidson dealership is. And, I mean, that's a pretty quick stretch from there until you hit Crescent Lake Road. We probably all drove that on the way here this morning, and so you folks understand what we're dealing with here. It's a short distance. Now, Ms. Scholes, in that period of time, says she's not speeding, so we have to assume the motorcyclists are in front of her. If she's not speeding, then the motorcyclists obviously aren't speeding, because at some point or other she catches up to them as they go through Crescent Lake Road. Now, she doesn't remember if, I think she said that light was green, and that she went through, and that's when she sees these multiple bikes. I mean, look, folks. Like I said, I think this was a traumatic experience she went through. I think what was going on is she's talking to her friend after a long day of working up at Applebee's. When you're serving at Applebee's and you're walking around all day, carrying stuff, you're tired, you're not necessarily playing detective and looking at every car. Nobody does that anyways when they're driving. She's talking to her friend. Next thing you know, she basically looks and sees this, what is a body coming at her car. Okay, so the whole point of that is this. Is that her perception is not necessarily what reality is. She does the rightful thing. She puts their car sideways, gets out of the car, makes sure that turns out to be, Miss Pagels is okay. She does the right thing, probably saves her life by doing that. All right. Now, in the meantime, she's testified that 3 to 5 minutes later, my client shows back up. But there's problems with that testimony. And I'm not saying that that's not how she perceived the incident, but that's not what the reality of the situation is. What happens is that from what we heard, my client, the girlfriend falls off the motorcycle. He turns around. He must have got off that motorcycle to call 911. You don't call it would be beyond crazy if he were to have had this happen. He just flips his cell phone out while on a crotch rocket and calls 911. It doesn't make sense. So what I think happened is that he turns right around. You've got Miss Scholes sort of doing what she's doing, okay? He has enough time to call 911, hang up the phone, which it must take at least 2 or 3 minutes, and then he talks to her. That's consistent with what she's saying, that she sees him about 3 to 5 minutes later. That's because he's already called 911 and reported this. So that's what's going on. This isn't some sort of thing where my client takes off and has a change of heart. I mean, I know that might have been presented that way, but that's not what's going on here. This was his girlfriend. He was very concerned about her. I mean, you heard the officer's testimony that he was upset about and sitting with her and trying to be with her. Now, we look at what happens next, and we look at these field sobriety tests. And field sobriety tests are this sort of unique thing. There's these tests that officers will come in and try to tell you if somebody passes or fails, and they failed, they must be over the legal limit. All right. Now, we sort of heard the officers, through my cross-examination, touching on what's really going on here. That there's 2 different types of field sobriety tests. We have the non-standardized ones, and then we have the standardized ones. The standardized ones are 3 tests based on science. I think both officers, I was able to get that out of them. At their training, that's what they learned. Now, I think it was Officer Post who answered my question in the affirmative that all 3 of these are supposed to be done at the same time. That makes them more accurate. Now, he's never even done the one that's the one-leg stand. We've probably all seen that on, if you've ever watched Cops, you've seen that. He didn't do the heel-to-toe walk like this. That doesn't happen. The only test that's done is that horizontal gaze and segments test. Now, it's told through Officer Post this is this wonderful test. This is completely accurate. I mean, really think about this, folks. Think about it. First of all, how could I ever actually challenge this thing? Because unless you stick a video right in somebody's face, we have to go off the officer's word for how somebody's eyeballs look. Secondly, you're talking about your eye basically moving almost like a sprinkler. And the thing is that when those squad car lights are on, even once that squad car lights are on, that's going to cause that automatically. Okay? So if there was nystagmus that was seen in this, even though we could never know, we have to take Officer Post's word for it, that certainly could have been caused by environmental factors. You got to turn all those lights off. Think about that. If you had lights flashing all over the place, even if they were flashing off the officer, flashing off the guardrail, you guys saw that video, those lights are flashing all over the place. And so that's when this test to see if your eyes are running fluid as opposed to starting and stopping. Let me tell you something, folks. If you had a strobe light, I guarantee your eyeballs would stop every time that light went on and off. And so you would have that same exact effect. That's why they teach you that turn your squad car lights off, because otherwise this test is meaningless. So the only standardized test that was done is really done improperly. We have 2 other tests done. We have the alphabet test, and we have the the counting forwards test. The alphabet test, you heard it. Dustin makes it to T both times. He's saying it fast. He's nervous. He's shaken up. I mean, he's also, you saw how Ms. Scholes was in her experience? That's what he's going through too. It's a traumatic experience. And so if you've ever been in an accident, can you imagine 5 minutes after this happens that all of a sudden you're being subjected to these tests? You're going to be just out of your mind. You're not concentrating on it. It's easy. Oh yeah, we can all do the alphabet right now. It's easy. But put yourself in his shoes and think about it like that. Now, he does A through T perfectly fine both times. He kind of sings it, he rushes it. You can listen to it if you want to. It's in evidence. The end is sort of odd. I mean, he just kind of fizzles off. And, you know, I wish I could tell you he did it perfect, but he didn't. He didn't. That doesn't mean he's drunk. I mean, certainly, given that circumstance, he could have been just freaking out. All right? Now, on top of that, you look at this counting test. It's purported and presented to you like he fails counting. Okay? And this counting test has certain things. Now, we don't actually have a real way of knowing whether somebody passes or fails this because this is Officer Post's own rendition of how this test should be done. I can't cross-examine him on that test or the alphabet test because I have no idea what the factors are that are pass or fail. Because this is a test that he's made up with a prior officer or whatever, and I mean, that alone ought to just raise a red flag for you folks. But nonetheless, my client passes that test. I mean, you heard him. He started real quick, stopped. Obviously, he's nervous. You know, when you hear both officers even saying on the stand that my client was nervous and shaken up, then he starts again, starts at the right number, ends at the right number, just fine. Yet no slurring, no weaving like that around, no. The only factor that you hear out of being intoxicated or not is that he had an odor of intoxicants and what is deemed a slight odor of intoxicants, consistent with somebody who drank 3 beers. I know there was some stuff presented too about how, you know, and it's interesting to see how words can be manipulated and things can be, you know, you say one thing, all of a sudden it's something else. The slamming of the beers. I mean, you guys heard what actually was said. The officer goes, oh, did you slam like 6 beers or something? And throws that question right at him. So he's interrogating him at the time. And my client goes, I had 3. You know, I had 3, just like he had said the entire time. He never said I slammed 3. Even when you listen to that, he's answering his question the best he can in the context of the question. This isn't some situation where his girlfriend goes to the bathroom in the last 10 minutes they're there, and then he just out of the blue decides to slam 3 beers. If he was drunk, there is no way in hell she would have hopped on that bike. There is no way at all. You even heard her say it. And she's got no, you know, skin in the game because she's not even with him anymore. So, I mean, it's just, that's what really happened. I mean, this is just beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, I can still reasonable doubt and that's enough, folks, but that's actually what really happened.